Nobody's ever talked to her, and she's never been interviewed anywhere. And now, understand, I'm not talking about one person. What I just told you applies to 7 people. How they all end up with that. That's part of what you get. I came in this business saying I was going to expose. When I talked about Michael Jackson, when I talked about R. Kelly, they canceled me for these things because why would you talk about another black dude? Race is not where the line is drawn. It's God's side and the other side. And we don't care nothing about the other side. Period. All of these big dick deviants is all catching hell in 2024. It's up for all of them. It don't matter if you Diddy or whoever you is. TG Jakes, any of them. All lies will be exposed. That's all. And anyone who takes that the wrong way, know why they take it the wrong way. The truth is
Everybody laughed when Katt Williams said it. They called it comedy, bitterness, exaggeration, another wild rant. But now it's looking less like jokes and more like a warning label nobody read, because while the internet was busy arguing timelines and personalities, 50 Cent was quietly doing something far more interesting. He wasn't clapping back. He wasn't tweeting. He wasn't denying a thing. He was editing. 7 names. Not random names. Not background names. Power names. The kind that make lawyers sit up straighter and executives stop returning calls. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. Nobody announced it. Nobody addressed it. The changes didn't come with a press release or a creative decision excuse. They just disappeared. That's when people went back to what Katt Williams said. And suddenly those jokes didn't sound funny anymore. They sounded specific. They sounded targeted. This whole situation makes Hollywood look less like an industry and more like a group chat with secrets. And once you notice the silence, you can't unhear it. Nobody woke up expecting a rewrite. There was no announcement, no trailer update, no creative direction excuse wrapped in corporate politeness. Just a documentary that suddenly felt lighter, not shorter, quieter, because when people went back to compare early references with what actually aired, they noticed something unsettling. Names that once hovered around the conversation were suddenly missing. Not challenged, not contextualized, erased like they were never part of the room to begin with. 7 names. Not background players, not internet nobodies. These were power-adjacent, industry-connected, phone call-making names. And here's where the tension thickened. No one publicly denied it. No one clarified it. The silence sat there like a locked door nobody wanted to open. That's when people started remembering what Katt Williams said months earlier. Back then, the internet laughed it off, called it a rant, called it bitterness. Comedy mixed with ego, they said. But Katt didn't say names would be exposed loudly. He said they'd be protected quietly. And that detail aged like a warning label, because 50 Cent isn't new to this game. He's not impulsive. He doesn't panic publicly. When he moves, it's calculated, especially when the stakes climb. So when edits happen instead of explanations, people notice. And when edits happen silently, people assume pressure. Let's be real for a second. Documentaries don't randomly lose names after production. That's not creativity, that's negotiation. That's lawyers, phone calls. And let's rethink this section. Fans started digging. Screenshots, old interviews, early commentary. Suddenly, clips resurfaced where names were referenced loosely, then never again. And that pattern didn't feel accidental. People asked the obvious questions. If nothing was wrong, why remove anything? If the names didn't matter, why bother cutting them at all? And if this was always the plan, why did earlier versions hint otherwise? That's where discomfort crept in. Because this wasn't about defamation or misinformation, nobody claimed that. This felt like precaution. And precaution usually means leverage exists somewhere in the background. Hollywood doesn't erase for fun. It erases to avoid consequences. And when powerful names disappear, it's usually because someone powerful asked nicely or not so nicely. The audience felt it instantly. Not outrage at first, curiosity. That slow, dangerous kind of curiosity that turns viewers into investigators. Because once people suspect censorship, they start reading between every line. Katt Williams' words resurfaced everywhere. Clipped, quoted, reposted with captions like he tried to tell us, What once sounded exaggerated now sounded strategic, like someone saying too much in a room built on silence. Meanwhile, Sean Combs stayed at the center of the gravity without being named directly. That alone told people everything. Because when conversations orbit without landing, it means the landing zone is protected. And here's the part that made people uneasy. No lawsuits, no angry responses, no public threats, just edits. Edits are quieter than denials. They don't start wars. They don't invite debate. They simply remove risk and keep the machine running. But the machine didn't expect one thing. The audience noticed. Viewers started watching differently. Not for what was said, but for what wasn't. Pauses felt intentional. Transitions felt suspicious. Every missing detail felt louder than the ones included. And suddenly, the documentary wasn't just content. It was a case study in power management. A reminder that truth in entertainment is negotiable, especially when influence enters the chat. People who once mocked Katt Williams went quiet. Not apologetic, just observant. Because it's awkward realizing the loudest guy in the room was also the most accurate. This wasn't exposure through confrontation. It was exposure through absence. 7 quiet omissions that spoke volumes without saying a word. And once people realized that, the conversation shifted. This stopped being about what was revealed. It became about what scared them enough to be removed. That's when curiosity turned into pressure. Because if 7 names vanished without explanation, how many more were never mentioned at all? Once people noticed the edits, the conversation stopped being casual. This wasn't a "did you catch that?" moment anymore. It became a collective pause, the kind where everyone realizes they're being managed. And nothing irritates the internet more than realizing it's being handled quietly. Social media turned into a digital forensics lab overnight. People weren't reacting emotionally anymore, they were comparing versions. Old clips versus new cuts. Early mentions versus final silence. That's when the word coincidence officially died. Because coincidences don't stack this neatly. They don't happen 7 times in the same direction. And they definitely don't all favor power. Memes started rolling in like artillery. Side-by-side screenshots labeled before the phone calls and after the lawyers. Clips slowed down. Captions sharpened. Sarcasm turned surgical. Comedy accounts smelled blood and went straight for the jugular. The public reaction split into 2 camps immediately. One side said this was responsible editing. The other said this was proof of influence doing what influence always does. Guess which side was louder? People started dragging up old interviews, old jokes, old warnings. Suddenly, Katt's past words felt less like chaos and more like coded messaging. Not reckless, strategic in the most uncomfortable way possible. Because when someone tells you the truth without naming names, it's usually because naming them would cost everything. And now, the silence around those missing names confirmed that risk was real. The wild part. Nobody stepped forward to defend the cuts publicly. No producers saying this is normal. No creative leads explaining narrative flow. Just vibes. And vibes are not explanations. That's when public outrage shifted from curiosity to suspicion. People weren't asking if edits happened anymore, they accepted that. They wanted to know who asked for them. And what leverage made the request unavoidable. Pop culture comparisons flooded the timeline. People said this felt like a biopic that suddenly skips the most controversial years. Others compared it to history books that politely forget certain chapters. Once you notice the omissions, you stop trusting the story. The documentary didn't lose viewers. It gained skeptics. And skeptics watch closer than fans ever do. That's the worst audience to disappoint. Comment sections turned ruthless. Every neutral moment got roasted. Every vague reference got questioned. People weren't consuming, they were interrogating. And that's when the narrative flipped. This stopped being about what 50 Cent showed. It became about what even he couldn't show. And that implication carried more weight than any accusation. Industry insiders stayed quiet, which only fueled speculation. Because when nobody rushes to deny something, the internet assumes there's nothing to deny. Silence becomes confirmation by default. Some fans tried defending the edits, said legal boundaries exist, said responsibility matters. And they weren't wrong, but they weren't convincing either. Because if the goal was responsibility, transparency would have followed. And transparency never showed up. Only removal, only absence. People started noticing something else too. The edits didn't weaken the documentary, they exposed its limits. It showed exactly how far truth can go before it hits a wall. And who gets to build that wall? That's when the phrase protected names went viral. Not accused, not exposed, protected. And protected implies power. Katt Williams' credibility quietly rose without him saying another word. He didn't victory lap. He didn't repost reactions. He let the silence validate him. The irony was brutal. The loudest truth came from the quietest confirmation. No press tour, no statement. Just 7 names missing. By the end of the week, nobody was asking if Katt exaggerated. They were asking how much he didn't say. And that shift, that's when things officially got uncomfortable for everyone involved. Because once the audience realizes truth is edited, they don't stop watching. By the time the dust settled, the damage wasn't loud. It was structural. The kind of quiet damage that doesn't trend for a day but changes how people watch forever. Because once trust cracks, every reflection looks distorted. The industry response was textbook. No emergency meetings on camera. No dramatic denials. Just distance, delays, and polite silence that felt rehearsed. That's when people understood the real consequence. This wasn't about embarrassment. It was about exposure without fingerprints. 7 names gone. And not a single lawsuit screaming innocence. 50 Cent never addressed the removals directly. And that restraint spoke volumes. Because when someone who thrives on confrontation suddenly goes quiet, it's usually because the fight isn't worth the fallout. Meanwhile, Katt Williams didn't say another word. No follow-up interviews. No "I told you so" victory laps. He let time do the talking, and time was ruthless. Public perception shifted slowly. Then all at once, people stopped calling Katt unstable. They started calling him early. And being early in Hollywood is often more dangerous than being wrong. The documentary itself became a symbol, not of revelation, but of boundaries. It showed exactly how far truth can travel before influence shuts the door. And audiences don't forget lessons like that. Relationships behind the scenes reportedly cooled. Not explosive fallouts, quiet recalibrations. Calls not returned. Collaborations postponed indefinitely. Because when power feels exposed, it tightens its circle. And anyone who risks widening it becomes a liability. Viewers felt the shift too. They didn't boycott. They didn't riot. They just watched differently, colder, sharper, less forgiving. That's the real loss. Not ratings, not reputation. It's when an audience stops suspending disbelief. The conversation evolved from who was removed to who was never mentioned at all. And that question haunted every frame. Because omission implies intent, entertainment thrives on illusion. But once the audience sees the wires, the magic doesn't vanish, it mutates into skepticism. And skepticism spreads faster than hype ever could. The irony is brutal. The edits meant to protect power ended up spotlighting it. People didn't forget the 7 names. They engraved the absence into the narrative, and no one involved could fully escape it. Every future project now gets examined for what's missing. Every silence gets interpreted as strategy. Every edit feels like fear in HD. And here's the part nobody wanted to admit. This wasn't exposure through bravery. It was exposure through caution. And caution rarely looks innocent. Katt Williams didn't need vindication speeches. The system validated him by flinching. And systems only flinch when pressure lands somewhere sensitive. The audience walked away with one conclusion. If 7 names could vanish without explanation, then truth in entertainment isn't about honesty, it's about permission. Permission granted by power, permission revoked by risk, and permission never given to the public. This story didn't end with answers. It ended with awareness. And awareness is dangerous because it doesn't fade with headlines. The documentary moved on. The industry adjusted. But the audience? They remembered. Because silence doesn't erase truth. It just teaches people where to look next. And if this many names disappeared quietly, the real question isn't what was removed. It's what hasn't surfaced yet. That's the cliffhanger. That's the discomfort. And that's why this story refuses to die. All right. If you're still here, Congratulations, you officially don't fall for polished narratives and convenient silence. You state because you know when something smells edited. It usually is. So do yourself a favor and smash that like button like it owes you money and changed its number. Hit subscribe like you just realized your favorite celebrity has a private burner and a backup burner. And ring that notification bell like secrets leak here faster than NDAs get violated in Hollywood boardrooms. Now jump into the comments, don't be shy. Which names do you think disappeared quietly? Was this smart protection or quiet panic dressed up as creative choices? Say it loud, say it reckless. The comment section is the real after party. Because let's be honest, this channel isn't about clean edits or safe conversations. This is where the dots connect, the silence gets translated, and the stories nobody wants discussed get put under stadium lights. If you're tired of documentaries that tell you just enough to stay comfortable, you're in the right place. If you're curious about what didn't make the final cut, you're exactly where you should be. New scandals don't get announced. They slip, they leak, they vanish. And Truth Tattle is where we rewind, replay, and ask why.